This is a reasonably happy event. A significant change is about to occur in the politics and practice of egg freezing, and it's something of great importance to women and men because the law change will affect some men and the storers of embryos as well. I'm going to start at the end with the most recent events and work backwards because most of you know pretty well the difficulties, practical and psychological and medical, that have led to a change in the law. I want to say that I'm very pleased that the Department of Health has come up with a very reasonable response to the hundreds of people who replied to the consultation, and indeed to the thousands more who didn't reply, but who have eggs in storage. Starting with the most recent events, as I mentioned, we should note that 53% of egg freezers apparently are between 35 and 40. And that's really very significant because that is the age at which the eggs are less than perfect. It's much better to freeze them in one's 20s. But what women seem to have done is waited until their mid-30s when they began to really be anxious about finding a partner and freeze their eggs then. And as we know, the eggs are not as fresh as they should be then. And the 10 years will expire in their mid-40s when perhaps they're feeling really, really desperate and anxious to use them. Now, frozen eggs today have the same success rate as fresh. So there's no reason to downplay the science. The problem with the 10 years was that it forced people to use their eggs or indeed have them destroyed far too early. Many a woman anecdotally has said, I felt that as the 10 years was coming to a close, I really had to use them with an anonymous donor, which I didn't want to do, or put pressure on some new man that I was meeting before he or I felt ready to commit to each other. It felt like too short a period. The other thing which I found was very distressing was the finance of it. Women would pay thousands of pounds to have the procedure. And then the clinic would charge them a reasonable sum for storage in the first year. And then every year that sum would go up. And if they didn't pay, there'd be a threatening letter saying, unless you pay this increased sum, your eggs will be disposed of. So the women might well spend more thousands in storage fees over those 10 years and still have a heartbreak at the end of having those eggs destroyed or further expense in taking them abroad. Now, the government, thankfully, has adopted the principles of equity for all, greater reproductive choice, reduced administrative burden on the clinics, and public acceptability. They've decided that a 10-year renewable storage period for everyone should pertain up to 55 years. There should be 10-year review periods and explicit written consent from the patient to continue storage and counselling. And that sounds to me very reasonable, every 10 years. Of course, if the patient is uncontactable or doesn't pay the storage fees, the clinic will be able to dispose of the eggs. And I well remember from 20 or 30 years ago, the first time that the storage period for embryos expired, it turned out that thousands of the owners of those embryos simply couldn't be traced because they changed their addresses or didn't respond to letters. And I think a very clear warning must be given to women who freeze their eggs at the outset, that they simply must stay in touch with their clinics, make sure the clinic has their address and that they respond. Otherwise, we'll be back to the same tragic situation. The consultation response from the government points out that there are still decisions to be made about third-party donations, family donations, posthumous use and research, and they will need further consultation, which I hope won't delay the change. The great majority of the consultees supported an extension. They were able to say, as we already knew, that the current law was wasteful, expensive, discriminatory and distressing. The few number of objectors were, as it were, the usual people who don't want any research on embryos, don't want any interference with the natural reproductive process. And although one may respect their views, they are a small minority and shouldn't be allowed to hold up the procedure. There's also been concern expressed about aged mothers. I think quite a few people wrote in and said that if women are allowed to keep their eggs for more than 10 years, you might have women trying to become mothers at the age of 70. To which I say, well, whenever a wrinkly pop star of over 70 has a baby, we all say, oh, jolly good for you, don't we? Moreover, it's unlikely to happen because under the law, a welfare test has to be applied when a woman is treated for reproductive procedures. She has to have counselling. The clinic has to consider the health of the mother and the potential baby. So I think it's highly unlikely that we'll see that particular extreme age limit. But the new law will give women more time for an unpressured choice to start a family later in life and give them a better psychological outcome, free of the pressure that I know that women of a certain age feel as the biological clock ticks away and they haven't been able to settle down. I do hope that in future there will be a possibility of control over those storage fees. I know it's a matter of the market, but the way the storage fees go up year after year and a very brutal demand for them to be paid, otherwise the eggs will be destroyed, is extremely distressing. I'm not sure that women realise just how much it's going to cost year after year. Now, I remain quite worried about a couple of things. First of all, what's going to happen to the eggs of women where the 10 years is expiring like now, or in the months or maybe even years before the government actually changes the law? Can you imagine being a woman who's heard with pleasure that the 10-year period is going to be extended, and yet her eggs are due to be thrown away in a month's time? I've written to the Department of Health and I've asked for an immediate moratorium on the disposal of frozen eggs until the law is changed, because I can't think of anything more needlessly wasteful and distressing than having to let eggs be disposed of in the next few months when we all know that the law is going to be changed. I am aware that the department, because of COVID, has granted everyone a 2-year extension, but it's still the case that some eggs will leave the end of their time soon, and we need to save them. I'm also a bit bothered by the statements in the government's response about needing further consultation on certain areas. That further consultation must not be allowed to hold up the immediate need to get that 10-year period extended. The other thing that worried me even more, speaking as a parliamentarian, you will have spotted the phrase in the government response that they'll change the law, in quotes, when parliamentary time allows, unquote. Now, when is that going to be? A year or more could go by. I noticed that there is a health bill going through Parliament right now, and I think it would be possible within the scope of that bill to have an amendment extending the time period for frozen eggs, because that fits in the possibilities of a health bill. And I urge the government, I ask the government most sincerely and urgently, please to do that right away so that we avoid the distressing possibility of eggs being disposed of needlessly. We've come so far with the support of Progress, the Royal College, the British Fertility Society, and everyone who's involved. We've managed to persuade the government to make this change and improve the lives of thousands of women for all time to come. Please get on with it now. That is our urgent demand. Thank you.